Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Rob Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. We'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Welcome to this episode of the Move Your Business Forward podcast. Today I'm joined by Neil Palmer and Alan Taylor, both from Fieldfisher, and we're specifically talking today from their experience, from their legal experience and the interaction they have with companies around employee ownership, EOTs, employee ownership trusts in particular, and just sharing some knowledge, experience about people's journey and approach to go down the route of succession and exiting a business through the employee ownership model of EOTs. So Neil, Alan, thanks so much for joining me today on this, and looking forward to sharing some thoughts and having a chat. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So first off, we're talking about approach and approach to EOTs. Once you've kind of maybe come to a conclusion, this is something to explore and go down. So Neil, if I start with you, what's normally the first step and first kind of things you think any business owner or shareholders or management team should be thinking about when they start going down this route of employee ownership?
Well, thanks, Rob. Probably the biggest thing to get across is that this should be a thoughtful and well-planned process. It's not something that should be hurried. And I think investing time at the outset and really working out what you're trying to achieve and planning the process as fully as possible will pay dividends at the end. I sometimes describe the process as an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is doing the legal process. The bit below the waterline is thinking about it, taking soundings, talking to people who've already transitioned to employee ownership, and really working out whether it's the best thing for you. And it's rare, but I do love it when clients get in touch and say, we've been thinking about this, we don't want to hurry. What do you think we should be doing now to prepare for this? We'll come back to you in a few months to take it forward. How can we get prepared for this? I think taking time, being patient, being thoughtful it is a very good way of approaching it.
I think we always welcome calls from people who are looking at EO as another option to either a sale or management buyout or something like that. And as Neil sort of said there, it's having people come to you, listen to what you've got to say, listen to people who've gone through it so they can understand the initial sort of perhaps doubts from employees as well about what may occur, how the company's going to move forward as well. And as Neil said, I think time's a real sort of thing here, that if somebody's going to have a successful transition to employee ownership, they've got to give it time and a lot of thought.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think a couple of things there, you mentioned that thought process, you've got to really get that early stage of exploring this, is compare it to something else. You've got to put it in the context of what are the other options, and therefore what might be the advantage to the current shareholders, the process of either earn out or exiting the business, but also what it means for the employees as well. And I think the context of comparing this to other things is part of that thought process, as well as talking to all those other people who've been through it before. So look, thanks for sharing that. And Neil, I like your iceberg analogy, because I think that's a nice way of describing it. And shall we dig into some of the things below the water level then, if we're going down that iceberg analogy?
Very good.
Because I think, as you say, the legal bit is clearly an important thing, and that's got to be done correctly. And there's thought in terms of the legal aspects, but as you say, there's lots of other things there to work out. So what would be your top tips, Neil, if you're talking to anyone about, going under the surface to what this really involves? What would be the main things you think they've got to really get their head around and understand?
Well, I think you've mentioned the first thing is to compare this process with other structures on the market. Now, sometimes clients come to us and they've had a bad experience. They've been through a trade sale or a failed trade sale, or they've been through some sort of process which hasn't worked, and their mind is made up. But some clients do come to us and say that we're thinking of doing this, we're thinking of doing lots of things. So I think the first top tip is to eliminate any alternatives or explore other alternatives with the right advisors, so that you feel that this is the right approach for you. But I mean, I'm unusual in a lawyer in that I don't think law is the centre of the universe, and I think when I'm looking at the approach to employee ownership, law is obviously very, very important, but I think that the 3 or 4 things which are very important to employee ownership is, one, you can't lose sight of the fact that the transaction is normally a self-funded process where the consideration, the sale consideration is paid out of the revenues generated by the business. So I think financial modelling and looking at the ability of the business to pay the consideration is ever so important. And looking at this at an early stage, looking at can the business afford the payments is very important. I think also clients should look at valuation and get some idea of valuation, because that obviously links into affordability and how much the business might be worth. I think also the cultural and the sort of employee side of it is very, very important. I think you've got to look at, do you have the right management team to take the business forward? Do you have the right people with the right skill sets in the business to make this happen? And where are you as an organisation culturally? Because I think employee ownership works for lots of organisations, but some possibly would need to work a bit more at this. So I think we've got affordability and financial modelling, we've got valuation, we've got culture, looking at the management team.
I think the management team is very important, because that's one thing that does tend to get looked over, certainly at the outset, because as Neil said there, with the deferred payment coming, you need that management team to drive the company forward or continue to drive it to produce the profits that are ultimately going to repay those who are exiting via the EO. So again, we tend to describe it like the EO sandwich, don't we? To people with the management in the middle, and I'm sure Neil take that forward in a little while. But the other thing also with the founders we tend to speak to as well when they're considering EO is they're thinking about what the legacy is going to be. Somebody wants to have their company be still around in 100 years or whatever it is, or whatever the legacy they're leaving to the employees is also very important at the initial sort of stage to think about.
I mean, those are good. Those are very good points. I think that my parting shot on this is that when considering employee ownership, you've got to look at all the stakeholders and look at this and say, does it work for everybody? I think a lot of employee-owned companies now, and I think we're appreciating that to be truly successful, it's got to work for everybody. You've got to look at founders, you've got to look at the management, you've got to look at the staff. But also, I've realised that employee ownership is just bigger than the transaction and the preparation. There's lots of stakeholders, external factors that you should consider. So I think my top tip is not to narrowly look at this as just a transaction. It's not just an exit. It's both an exit for founders or a partial exit, but it's actually embarking on quite an exciting new business model, which will hopefully transform the business. Yeah,
it's interesting. So a couple of things I want to pick up on, because I think the legacy thing I think is important, and often when I'm talking to founders about this, there is that desire to leave a legacy, but they want to hand it over to someone else at the same time, and linking that into the management team that you're kind of leaving behind or is going to take control of the business. I think you've got to make sure there's a fit that they're going to get this legacy thing as well, because there's no point in a founder just talking about some legacy. Ultimately, this is going to end up being the legacy of the new management team and potentially management team beyond that as well. And I think that's one of the key things to kind of get embedded within everyone's thought process, that this needs someone to hand over the reins and have a plan for that succession, but have a new and excited management team that get why they're doing this and that actually ticks boxes for them to make it make sense as well. Have you got any thoughts as to how, and I guess linked to this is all timing, because some of the stuff we're talking about here is going to sit well and truly within the head of the founder. If it's just one founder or a couple of shareholders, there then comes a point where you've got to start communicating it with others. And if you're still not decided this is definitely the right way to go, that's a careful balancing act, because you don't want to say you're doing this and then backtrack ideally, but it's got to be discussed. Have you got any thoughts as to how to approach talking to your management team about this, the future leaders of the business, but also the timing of that to kind of make it all work?
Well, that's a good question, and one which it's quite difficult to answer, because clearly our view is that communication's absolutely central to this process, and the founder should be engaging with the senior leadership team as soon as possible. Now, I get that it may not be a certainty, there may be confidentiality issues about that, but I think engaging as soon as possible. Once you may have, the founder might get a bit of provisional advice, may have thought about it. I don't think that they would blurt it out at the outset, say, I've been thinking about this, what do you think? But I think engaging them as soon as possible, because as I said before, I see this as employee ownership should be something that works for everybody, and people have different views, people have different skills, and they can feed into making it even better. I have been in situations where the founder has only announced this to the staff at completion of the transaction, and as a sort of rabbit out of the hat. And I really think that the whole idea of employee ownership is engagement, collaboration, sharing, and getting input from all parts of the business. And that kind of suggests that you should be involving the stakeholders much earlier than you might do on a trade sale where you keep everything confidential.
I think also with speaking to the management team, it's also about, you would hope that they've bought into the same ethos that you have over the years as well. And you've got to can't get away from the commercial decision. You're going to need to have somebody who's going to be managing director from that management team who are going to take it forward. So you could probably have a conversation with that person that you think is going to be the man or woman who can drive the company forward and leave that legacy behind as well, but also to listen to what sort of ideas they've got as well. Because as Neil said, it's not just about saying, okay, here you go, carry on as it was, but it's more about saying, okay, we believe in you, and you go and do all the ideas you thought you had previously. You can go away and explore those as well.
So it can be a shift in how the founder has acted up to that point, and a lot of founders are fantastic from the get-go. Sometimes I think part of this process is understanding that you need to share and you need to get people involved. A lot of them do that already, but maybe that's part of the planning process, is saying this is a new thing and I need to approach it differently.
Yeah, for sure. I guess one other thing to touch on there is, there's obviously been a number of companies going through this over the past years, but we're seeing more and more companies explore this, and more companies now coming out of the period of paying off the founders and going past that point of needing to do the deferred payments. So where do you see the trend in terms of employee ownership, in terms of where it's going from more companies showing an interest, but also the learnings I think everyone's got from the fact this isn't just one transaction, and there's got to be a future plan, and these businesses still progressing forward?
All good questions. I mean, clearly employee ownership is booming, and more companies are making the transition. I think we're at a critical point, probably for two reasons. One is that a lot of the companies that embarked on this in the early years of 2014, 2015 have come through the payment period, some very quickly, and are now in that position where they're exploring how to deal with the new world and how to distribute profits and what the profit share looks like. And they're developing new ideas. So what happens after is now come to the present. And the other thing, as you know, Rob, is that we've had the knowledge program and the report last year, which actually finally gave us some really good data and statistics, which showed that this that the employee ownership model is more productive and can be really helpful for businesses and help them be successful. So I think I see the trend only basically the graph going higher and more companies thinking about this. But I think because we're getting a much more mature market, one of my particular interests is what happens after, and that we really need to give some focus to keeping the magic going and keep, because I think employee ownership is a continuous process that really the hard work starts when you become employee owned, and you have to complete working at it. The more companies that are doing this, the more companies that are getting through the initial payment period, that they have to address these issues about how to keep it real and fresh and to keep going forwards.
I think also with the companies that have gone through the process, as Neil said there, to almost or have repaid the original founders, is that they've probably gone through some tough times with COVID, etc. And some of the plans may have been delayed because of that, reducing profits, but they're good questions to have, good things to have to deal with. What are we going to do with the cash? What are we going to set up an academy? What are we going to do with the money for the employees? Is it going to be a learning academy or whatever? These are good things to have to worry about, if you could call it worrying, or to think about, rather than it didn't work out for us. But again, if you think about companies, the natural progression for companies is there's going to be an element of staff turnover. And as Neil said, the reason why it continues to be an ongoing process is that some of the new people weren't there when it first happened.
Yeah.
And therefore, they've only known this, and therefore you've got to continue to reinvent yourself as you go along as well.
The really positive thing about this, Rob, is that I think employee-owned companies are very good at listening and sharing ideas. And I've noticed this at the conferences I've been to. We brought some clients together who were like 5 years employee-owned a couple of months ago, just to see what their experience was and what ideas they had. And I think what I learned from that was they're all very enthusiastic, really happy that they made the choice, but they all have different issues, and they were very keen to share and form a sort of group where they could just get ideas from each other about how to solve their issues.
I think what came out of that as well was that there was a lot of similar sort of themes, but they all had their own individual elements to this, rather than a sort of, there wasn't a one-stop answer to all those themes at all.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's lots there to share. So thank you so much for that. I'm conscious of time, just to give this snippet of employee ownership from your perspective. So just to round up, if you were going to have one tip to anyone listening to this, and this could be whether they're exploring employee ownership, or maybe they're sat there in an employee-owned company thinking, yeah, this doesn't seem to quite be going as I thought it might. What would you encourage them to do? The top tip, Neil, from your perspective, if you're going to give one person something to do.
Well, I mean, my top tip is to be curious and to talk to specialists, but talk to other employee-owned businesses, and really, because it's one thing to talk to a specialist like me and say, what do I need to do to become employee-owned? But what's probably more important is to talk to employee-owned business, say, what's it like? What are the challenges? How have you overcome them? What issues are facing you? So I think my top tip is that this is a learning experience. Anything you can do to explore and understand and really get knowledge beforehand is time well spent.
Great.
That's probably my top tip.
Thank you. Thanks, Neil. And Alan, if you had one top tip to anyone, what would you say?
I'd say that the top tip, or two tips. One, have time at the beginning if you're thinking about EO. Two, also to talk to people and ask them what would they do differently.
Yeah.
Through the process, because we all may think we've got the right answer, but if you speak to those people and say, what would you have done differently, you've probably got a good sort of base to start off with your thought process of going to an employee ownership company.
No, perfect. Thank you both. Well, I love that curiosity. Take the time and talk to others is absolutely perfect. So, look, there's just been a snippet, and hopefully, some people have got some thoughts out of listening to this. So, thank you both for spending the time with me on this and sharing your thoughts and ideas. So, thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.